Thank you for joining me. I'm Camille, and this is my corner.
I'll start from the beginning. It was around 6 o'clock that morning, July 18th, 1973. And Milton woke up screaming and hollering. He was having I guess you would say, a bad dream or a nightmare or whatever. But he kept yelling. He said, "Look, I've been shot. I've been shot. I have blood all over me." I said, "No, you're just dreaming. It's nightmare. You're just dreaming. Wake up, wake up." The next thing we knew, it was time for him to go to work. So he had gotten up to go to work about 8 o'clock. So once he gotten up at 8 to go to work, he left for work. He was working with some more young men at LSU. So they went, but they didn't stay the whole time. They came back because they needed them for that afternoon rather than the morning. So he returned home. So I would say, I guess about 10 o'clock, we heard this knock on the door. And my daughter, she was 2 years old at the time. She had just turned 2. And she jumped to go answer the door. So when he went to the door, he opened the door, and there were these 2 tall white men. And he wanted to know who or what were they looking for. Well, at the time, Milton had on the door, on the front of the door, his name. He had Milton X and a little plaque that was on the door. Well, they said they were looking for Milton Scott. He said, "My name is Milton X Scott." I remember very vividly. And that's when they said, "Well, we're looking for you for desertion of the Army." And Milton told me, he said, "Look, I've never been in the Army, and y'all been following me for the last couple of days. I've never been to the Army, and I'm not going anywhere with you." So that's when he slammed the door. Well, once he slammed the door, my daughter and I, we were in the next room, and we heard this loud thump. So I saw the footprint on the door later, but one of the FBI men kicked the door open, and Milton told him, he said, "Y'all not coming in here with those guns drawn with my family in here. You're not coming in here." And that's when the fighting started, and you could hear the licks. I heard the licks. They came out of the house, on the porch, down the steps, the sidewalk, and to the parking lot. And after a few minutes, I heard a gunshot, and I screamed, trying to get something on. And when I screamed, I got to the top step, and I saw the gun on my husband's chest, and that gun went off again. And I literally fell to the ground, but I knew I had to get to him. And my baby was right behind me. And he was bleeding. I mean, just blood was coming from everywhere, and I couldn't stop screaming and hollering. But they told my 2-year-old child, "Get out the way. If you don't get her out of the way, we're going to do the same thing to her that we did to her daddy." And I said, "Whatever you did to him, you got to do it to me too. You can't do anything to my baby. You better not." And it was just so much. When I looked around, there were so many people, but I couldn't stop crying. I was just so overwhelmed. I couldn't stop crying.
Andrea, what do you remember?
My memories are very vague because, again, I was 2 years old. I will say, however, that I may suffer from a little bit of PTSD, by way of loud noises, gunshots in particular, fireworks. I can't do any of that. And just vague recollections that I've had. I remember that somebody picked me up and put my body on the back seat of a car that the interior was blood red and it was really soft, maybe like velvet. And I remember her screaming, and I remember her driving real erratically because my body was being tossed about in the car. And later, my mom did tell me that a neighbor picked me up just to get me out of there, and later returned with me after things had calmed down.
What I saw with the gun on my husband's chest, the mortician that took care of the services, he told me he had never seen such a hole in somebody's chest. He said he could put his fist in that hole and it would not touch the sides. They put that gun directly to his heart and blew his heart out. And ma'am, I witnessed that. And that I will never get over. And I was almost 7 months pregnant at the time.
Tell me about the aftermath. Did you automatically expect the agents to be arrested or fired or charged? What happened after?
I thought they would have been charged because to say that they were representing the Army, they didn't have on Army uniform. I mean, these men, both of them were over 6 feet tall, at least close to 200 pounds. My husband, at his biggest, he was like 140, 5 feet 6 inches tall, a small man. But he did the best he could. But eventually, they beat him with the nightsticks, and after that didn't do, that's when they shot him. Overdue force.
Right. But when the decision came back not to charge them, what was your reaction?
I was in a state of shock. I was in a state of shock. And nobody didn't want to hear what I had to say. But I was in a state of shock because it was not right.
Let me ask all three of you, especially the Breonna Taylor case. Every single time one of these cases happen, tell me the emotion that comes up. And Andrea, you said you have PTSD. What goes through your mind when you hear one of these cases?
Anger, frustration, and all for what? A mistake? Nobody's accountable. I'm hurt by it, honestly.
Milton, let's bring you in. I know that you've been instrumental in trying to get the case reopened. Tell me what's happened in the last few years.
So let me first address your previous question about how I feel as I see the incidents as they happen regularly in the news. So usually I watch the news a lot, but when these types of cases come up, I'll notice that they're in the news a lot. They have heavy rotation for a few days, and then eventually the news drops in and moves on to the next topic. And I'll say for the George Floyd murder, that was actually televised. It was on TV. And till today, I have not seen that tape. Every time it comes on, I'll change the station, I'll watch something else. But the few seconds that I've seen here and there where I'm channel surfing and it comes up and that's what's being broadcast, I feel as though I've seen too much. And to me, the sections that I have seen of the George Floyd murder, it was as though I saw my father. And that was why I decided to really try and reach out and see what I can do with regards to just pursuing my father's case. But to answer your second question about what I have done most recently, so I've been in touch with the DOJ. My father's case is a part of the Emmett Till cold case file. It is being looked into, and it has been looked into by the DOJ. I've spoken with them most recently to bring up any concerns that my family has and just ask that they look into those concerns. And that's what's happened most recently. Don't have a whole lot of updates where that's concerned.
So Milton, you, like your mother said, she was 7 months pregnant with you at the time that your father was killed. You didn't know your father. We were talking earlier, and you mentioned that you don't have a lot of photos of your father, and the photo of the crime scene, what that does to you. Tell me about that.
So honestly, I've seen, and I counted them, and I literally made a list of the photos I've seen of my dad in my lifetime. And I've literally seen 8 photos, maybe 9 photos of my dad. And each time I think of my dad and what he looked like, that one photo is the one photo that's preeminent in my mind, because that is how I see my dad, which I don't like it. But the way that I see my dad is him lying on the ground in a puddle of blood, because that's the photo that comes up every time I ever Google my dad's name just to see what's out there. I'm not very happy about that. I don't feel very good about that.
My children, they were robbed of their dad. And to me, that was one big hurt that I never really got over. And as they call it, the end game, I would like for somebody to step up and take responsibility, be it the Army, the federal government, or whoever. But I would like some closure to this particular event.
Yes, tell me what happened, that it was a mistaken identity or stolen identity, actually.
They had his name, but they didn't have a picture, an accurate picture of him. So the Milton Scott that came up was my husband, okay? But Milton had been out on the West Coast, and undoubtedly he lost his license. Well, he told me he had lost his wallet. So his identification and everything was in it. And so the person that found his wallet used his information to go into the Army, at which the federal government, just a day or two after my husband was killed, found out that the man that they were looking for was actually already serving time. He was incarcerated in San Quentin. So just that small amount of time that they had, that they used to find the real Milton Scott, if they would have put more time into it, they could have found out that Milton X. Scott was not the man that they were looking for.
Did anyone ever apologize to you or your
No,
family?
ma'am, not until this day. No, ma'am.
What would be justice for you?
An apology. I had to raise my children alone. My children were deprived of a lot of things because they were raised with a one-parent family. And yes, I would like some compensation for my children.
Milton, you never had a chance to meet your father. Tell me about that loss, what they took away from you that day.
One thing that I want to bring up for sure, I was born with scoliosis. No one in my family, not even a distant cousin, has scoliosis. And we've always talked about that, and I've always wondered why. But my mom went through severe trauma when she was at the beginning of her 3rd trimester. So I've even talked to orthopedic doctors. I've had several surgeries many years ago, but I've had 8 orthopedic surgeries that were corrective surgeries to correct my scoliosis. And I'm okay, but there's a certain degree of pain that I deal with every day. But as far as loss and how I feel about not having my father, it pains me because I have so many questions. I want to know what kind of man he was, what he would have wanted for me, what he would expect from my children, what he would think of my accomplishments and what I've done in this world. Also my sister, also my mom, just in general, what are his thoughts? Because what happens now, every day, and there's literally a section of every day where I think about my dad. What happens now is I go through those conversations with myself and just imagine what he would have thought with the little information that I have about my dad. And I have those conversations with myself. So I just wish that I would have been able to have those discussions with him. It would have meant a lot more to me.
What about you, Andrea?
Pretty much the same thing that Milton said. I felt like I was deprived. in more than one way, because my mom has always had two jobs, always. So not only did we miss him, we missed her. You know, my children grew up without knowing their grandfather. Um, and from what I understand, I was the apple of his eye. I was his little girl. And so I can imagine how he would have felt about my children.
Nobody was arrested in your husband and father's case. Nobody has been arrested in Breonna Taylor's case, and so many others. Tell me, like, what do you feel about the fact that it's still happening, and how do you think it can change?
If there were consequences, if they knew that there would be consequences if I were to pull the trigger without cause or without thinking. Like my mom said, my dad was unarmed. He was at home relaxing. He didn't even have on shoes. He had on pants and a shirt, no socks, no shoes. He was relaxing. And I think that maybe it's a training thing. If police, and I don't know how you teach compassion, but if maybe as they go through training, someone can explain to them that, hey, we're no different from you. We have families, and we want things, we want to accomplish things, and we want well for our children. One thing that's been an issue for us from the beginning, the U.S. Army asked or solicited the FBI to go and locate Milton Scott. The first form of identification that the FBI was able to go and receive was from Louisiana Motor Vehicles. Whereas it seems to me that the U.S. Army, since they were the requesters, they should have provided a photo ID, fingerprints, and any other identification documents that they had. So those two FBI agents with no picture identification, no fingerprint identification, went to Louisiana Motor Vehicles. They received my father's driver's license. So at that point, they had a picture identification of Milton Scott, but it was the wrong Milton Scott. So that's always been an issue for us. I wish that they had done proper due diligence before showing up at my father's door with guns drawn. And when they showed up at my father's door, there was no arrest warrant. There were no military papers. It was just two men, the same two men that had been following my father for a few days and taking pictures. Those two men showed up at my father's door and with guns drawn, saying that they were there to arrest him for army desertion. My father had never been in the army. My father was a black Muslim, and being in the military was actually against his beliefs. And being armed was also against his beliefs, so he didn't own any guns or weapons.
Wow, what a story, what a tragedy. As we wrap up, and I want to thank you again, your family, all of you, for your time. What do you want America, the world, to know about this case, and really your husband and father? What would be the message?
I want America to know that my father was at home. He was relaxing with his family. He woke up that morning, 6 a.m., had a premonition that he had been shot, and literally 4 hours later, my father was dead on his front lawn. He did not do anything wrong aside from questioning who are these men that showed up at his door that were there to take him away. Bearing in mind, we were in 1973. At that time, maybe it wasn't unusual for someone to go for a ride in the car and never come back home again in Louisiana. So my father had questions about what was going on, and I would want America to know that had proper due diligence been done, perhaps my father would be alive today.